And speaking of noise, is the sound of cicadas. It's approaching soon. Next month, the middle of May, is when we're expecting to see those emerge from the ground. It's a periodical event that happens here quite frequently. Of course, there's annual cicadas as well. It's a staple of the South, that noise during the summer months. And this year is particularly interesting for cicadas because people are talking about this dual emergence. And what exactly is that when we talk about broods? Well, here to talk about that this morning is DeAnna Beasley, and I'll bring her in here. She is the associate professor with the Biology, Geology, and Environmental Sciences Department at UTC. DeAnna, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So this is a really hot topic right now. A lot of people on social media saying that they are dreading the thought of cicadas making their annual return, it feels like. But as I mentioned, this year it just has that added significance with that dual emergence throughout certain parts of the country. Talk a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so periodical cicadas, so they're part of a larger group of cicadas. We have about 190 species of cicadas here in North America. Periodical cicadas are doing something interesting in that they have probably one of the longest life cycles among insects. Some live underground for 13 years and others live for as long as 17 years underground. And then they emerge in mass during that emergence year. They mate, they lay their eggs, and then they start the cycle anew for another 13 or 17 years.
Right. Now, you mentioned the mating process. And when we hear that noise, what exactly, how is that involved with that whole process? Because it is deafening.
It's deafening.
Described as sticking your head in a jet engine. And, if you approach a tree or, a wooded area, you probably will hear a lot of that.
You will. So cicadas live off of the trees. So let's say we're talking about the Great Southern Brood, or Brood 19, which will be emerging in this area. They are on a 13-year cycle. And so during those 13 years, they're underground and they are attached to the root of the tree. So typically it's your hardwood trees like your oaks. So for folks who have a lot of oak trees in their backyard, you're probably going to hear quite a bit of them.
DeAnna, you know so much about cicadas. I'm really curious. You've done extensive research on this topic in the past, and you've actually been published before, which is really cool. What sparked your interest in these insects? I'm really curious to know.
So it started with the parents of this generation that's coming out. In 2011, I was a graduate student at the University of South Carolina. And a lot of folks in the community were contacting our lab. I was studying grasshoppers at the time, asking us about these cicadas. They wanted to know more about the emergence. And so my interest, was more or less community led. Like folks wanted to know, they were curious. And so as a, early scientist, I was like, well, let me try and look at this and understand this question. So I started tracking them with the help of folks around the community in South Carolina. So we were able to map where we're seeing these emergence patterns across South Carolina and parts of Georgia. And then it just continued. I went on to North Carolina State University and was able to track Brood 2, where, we were able to look at the effects of urbanization on their body size and so forth. And that took quite a bit of effort from public scientists, folks sending in samples and telling us about where they're finding these cicadas. And now here I am in Chattanooga at UTC, studying or getting ready to track the offspring of that 2011 generation.
Wow. So many years span between those, and then they reemerge again. And it just is like, it's amazing to think that they're spending 13 to 17 years underground. A lot of people want to know, what are they doing under there that long? And what's the process? What's that part of the process like? Because it seems like they're only above ground for, a few weeks, and then the process begins all over again.
Right. Yes. It's pretty underground. They're not doing much. So they attach to the roots of the tree. And once they find a spot on the tree, they more or less stay there. And one of the ideas behind why it's such a long cycle is that they're feeding off of not so much the phloem or the sap of the tree, but the xylem. So that's mostly water, maybe some amino acids. And so since it's not as nutritionally dense compared to the sugary phloem or sap, it takes longer for them to develop. So that's when you start getting into those longer cycles of like 13, 17 years, that sort of thing.
Oh my goodness.
So they're not doing a lot. And so what we're seeing here is like one of the emergence holes. So they use the tree cycle to kind of time when it's time to emerge. So they're almost like tasting the tree and just kind of getting a sense of like how many springs have passed, right?
Right.
And so when they reach that 13th or 17 years, if we're talking about the brood 8 that's coming up north, each individual starts to make these tunnels and start to emerge. Yeah. So when you start to see a bunch of holes appearing around your tree, that's when you know that it's about to get noisy.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm noticing some people are commenting live, and I want to bring some people's comments in.
Sure.
Tina here says, I'm not looking forward to these ugly bugs. And I think a lot of people share that sentiment, Tina. But meanwhile, Dusty Lanier says they can't wait for them. Like it just seems like it's kind of a toss-up.
It's fair. I mean, it's something out of a sci-fi movie. If it's not something you're familiar with, they have black bodies and red eyes and yellow to orange wings. It's just not an insect that we're used to seeing in our everyday life, right?
Right.
I will say that they are, they're from the Hemiptera order, so they're related to aphids, your leafhoppers, your shield bugs. So you don't have to worry about them biting you.
Right. That's good.
Yeah. So they're just a nuisance, right? And so and the idea, if we're thinking about this ecologically, the reason why they're doing this, they're coming out in such high numbers and so forth, is a way of kind of overwhelming the predators in the environment. It's this idea of like, well, you can't eat all of us. And eventually predators are going to say, I can't look at another cicada. And so your chances of surviving go up if you're coming out in these high numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when we look at them, they've got these bug eyes, quite literally. We'll leave it at that. But, you mentioned earlier about how people are tracking these as they start to emerge. And it looks like UTC and you have created a really cool survey that people can visit. And they can actually, if you scroll down here, you've got fun facts listed all about cicadas and some image to help you identify them if you are looking for that confirmation. And you can fill out a form that allows you to document exactly where you spotted a cicada, what time, attach some images. And of course, if you hear any cicada activity, you can upload some audio just to confirm that what you are listening to is indeed the sound of cicadas. That's so cool.
Yeah. So as always, the community got me into studying cicadas, and the community is still interested in cicadas. And so, one of the questions that we can ask here with this upcoming emergence is, how has the changes in our land use, how has changes in our climate impact where these cicadas are emerging? So as we said before, they rely heavily on trees. And so we might expect to see lower emergence patterns where, we've seen a lot of the landscape changes. And so while they don't have that conservation endangered status, this is a, phenomenal natural event that we've been tracking since the 1700s.
Right.
And so it's an amazing opportunity to kind of track where they are, and where it is relative to like how we as humans have changed the landscape. So we're hoping more folks report where they're seeing them and where they're tracking them, and then we can start to compare that to previous emergence patterns and really start to see what the relationship is there.
Right. Now, where can people go to find that survey? Is there a quick site at UTC that people can head to?
Yes, we actually have UTC just recently, the marketing team just recently posted
Right.
an article about our study, and so I can share that with you later.
Yeah, and I'll be sure to
and
post that in the comments below, so that way when people watch this back later, they can see that and easily go to this survey. And of course, you know, over the next month when they finally start to emerge, people can start taking advantage of that. Now,
Absolutely.
that whole process takes about how many weeks? Well, will we be hearing them through the summer months?
We might, depending upon how warm and, because the singing and their behavior is going to depend upon temperature. It's going to depend upon lighting. So depending upon how warm of a spring and summer we're going to get, we
Right.
can expect 6 to 8 weeks of the emergence. Probably peak emergence, like where it gets really loud, probably, for 4 weeks, and then it
Wow.
starts to taper off. So it's amazing. This brood is the largest of the cicada, periodical cicada broods that are here in this part of the world. So it'll span from, Tennessee all the way up through South Carolina into North Carolina, Georgia,
Right.
maybe parts of Florida. So this is a big brood or population. We define brood as just a group of these individuals that are coming
Right.
out there.
Now, of course, the phrase "everything's bigger in the South," and I'm curious to know. And compared to cicadas up north, is the size different in the palm of your hand? Is it still like 2 to 3 inches?
Well, it's interesting. So the study we did on brood 2 seems to show this relationship between the, up north, but then also where they are relative to the city. And so it seems like further up north, they tend to be smaller compared to further down in the southern range. But if you incorporate the urbanization effect, so like cicadas we find in the city, those cicadas tend to be larger,
Right.
or about the same size as you would expect in the southern brood. And so some ideas that may be explaining that, maybe it's just cities are warmer. And so it allows cicadas up north to kind of get away from that cold effect. And so they're able to grow bigger. So short answer, in the South, perhaps, it'd be interesting to kind of follow up on this brood and just kind of see if that pattern is still there. But no, it's really fascinating. I see a lot of comments where people are saying,
they're like gross. They don't want to even think about it. And, we mentioned this, a lot of people, when they see something, bug-eyed like this with those big red eyes, I think a lot of us are kind of averted away from that. We don't want to deal with that. It's creepy crawly.
Yeah.
But these are an amazing phenomenon that happens, every year. And of course, periodical, this amazing dual emergence that's seen all across the nation. DeAnna, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and talk a little bit about this, because there are a lot of, questions and that gross factor about it. But when you talk about it, it's all part of the process that we have.
Absolutely. I just invite folks, as an ecologist, you see different ways in which life goes about doing life. And this is just one of the extreme ways in which we see insects going about their day. So even though there's the ick factor for a lot of folks, I just invite you to consider the wonder, and that this is the strategy that's working for them, right? So
Right.
So enjoy it, and it'll eventually be over.
That is right. DeAnna, thank you again so much for walking us through a lot of that information. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.